You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us.
Please stay tuned at the conclusion of this episode to hear about our Patreon program and our commitment to help find people who have gone missing. We'll also share with you where you can find more information and how you can join our team and help our efforts. You'll get recommendations for other podcasts we think you'll enjoy and more.
So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Michael John Olson was born into a family of 6 on November 9th, 1959. The young man grew up in affluent Edina, Minnesota, and as a teenager loved to play golf and was on the high school golf team. A student council member, Michael graduated from Edina East High School in 1978. During the summers between his high school years, he worked as a caddy at the local country club, where he was a valued employee. Everyone described Michael as a great kid, someone who was friendly, a hard worker, and a terrific golfer. But golf in Minnesota in the winter is tough. So after doing a year at the University of Minnesota, 20-year-old Michael decided to move to South Florida, a golfer's paradise, and try to break into the golf industry as a professional. Using his experience as caddy master and starter at the Edina Country Club, he scored a job at the Presidential Golf Club, packed up his stuff, and made the drive from Minnesota to West Palm Beach, Florida, in November 1979. He settled into his new job quickly and made friends with his colleagues at the club. But Michael was having some trouble finding an affordable place to live. He was working with a rental agency, but no luck so far. For now, he was staying in a Howard Johnson's motel at 1901 Okeechobee Boulevard in West Palm Beach. He had jokingly told an employee of the rental agency that if he didn't find a permanent residence soon, he'd have to go home. His money was going to run out. Let's talk about when Michael was last seen. After work on Friday, November 30th, Michael and his buddy James Cronin, a transplant from upstate New York, had gone to the nearby dog track, the Palm Beach Kennel Club. Michael bet quite a bit of money on some of the races, and by the time they left after the 12th race, he'd lost about $50 over the course of the evening. He had some money to spare as he had just cashed a $700 check from back home, money his father had sent to help him pay his living expenses. $700 in 1979 was comparable to about $2,600 in today's dollars. It appears Michael may have had this cash on his person that night. Remember that because if Michael was publicly handling that amount of money, it may have attracted the wrong type of person. And he was driving a brand new Pontiac Grand Prix. After the dog track, the two young men went to a bar called the Wildside Lounge, and from there moved on to a dance club called Mr. G's. They partied there until closing time. At that point, they left in Michael's car, and he dropped James off at his own vehicle, parked at the Belvedere Baptist Church at Cherry Road and Congress Avenue. James got into his own car after saying goodnight to Michael, even though it was more like good morning. It was after 5 a.m. James told police that Michael said he might be a little late to work the next day, but he'd be there. Although there are varying reports about exactly what time Michael was supposed to report to work on Saturday. James then said he drove straight home and went to bed. Michael's drive back to his motel should have taken less than 8 minutes. I don't know how exactly Michael planned to get up and get to work on Saturday after going to bed at daybreak, and sure enough, he didn't show up. After some time, Michael's coworkers and boss began to be concerned that he hadn't been heard from. They called his room with no answer. On December 2nd, some of them actually went to his motel and got the manager to open up his room, but he wasn't there. That afternoon, his boss, Richard Jensen, called the club in Edina, Minnesota, where Michael had worked, which had referred him to this new club. They hadn't heard from Michael, but the manager there knew the Olson family well and called over to the house. This was how Sue and John Olson found out that Michael was missing. Michael had also failed to call his brother on December 2nd, which was a planned phone call he would not have missed. Michael was formally reported missing around 9 a.m. on December 3rd by his boss, Richard Jensen. WPB police checked his room and found all his personal possessions still there. Police notes indicate that it did not appear as though Michael ever made it back to his room, number 114, after dropping James off, although I'm not sure how they knew this. But Michael's maroon Pontiac Grand Prix with a beige top was not in the parking lot of the Hojo's either. Checks of local jails and hospitals failed to turn up Michael. Police put out a bolo for Michael and his Grand Prix with Minnesota tags EJV 987 and a Miller Motor Company bumper sticker. The airport parking lot was checked for his car with no success. Police interviewed James Cronin, whom it seems they did not consider a suspect, and he told them all about the movements he and Michael had made on Friday night, going to the dog track and bars. James reported that Michael had made a strange statement that he had a 1,200-mile drive ahead of him. James didn't know what Michael was talking about and kind of ignored it. It's about 1,700 miles from Edina to West Palm Beach, but as far as anyone knows, Michael didn't have plans to return home. And if he did, it seems really unlikely that he would leave all his things and his golf clubs behind. Police called the head pro at the Edina Country Club, Bob Reith, who told them that Michael was reliable and very highly thought of, and nothing that would indicate he would just disappear for unknown reasons. Michael wasn't the type to take off on a whim or bail on work responsibilities. A $65 paycheck Michael had earned at the Presidential Golf Club went uncollected. Michael had vanished. Police made the rounds of the clubs, bars, dog track, the Hojo's, the restaurant at the nearby Denny's, and so on, with Michael's picture. They tried to track down everyone staying at the motel that night Michael disappeared. They canvassed the area around the motel extensively and contacted regular delivery people in the area who would have been out on the morning of December 1st. All of these efforts failed to turn up any leads. Police also used a boat to check a pond and a canal that ran behind the Hojo's and Michael's room, to no avail. Sue and John Olson didn't know a lot about Michael's life in Florida. He hadn't been there that long. They knew he was happy, that he was loving his new job and being able to play golf whenever he wanted. But Sue and John had heard one name from Michael, the name of a woman he knew, Mary Ann McCreevy or McCreary. They thought that Michael had told them she was a professor at Florida Southern University. But when police called over to that school, there was no one of that name employed by or enrolled at the university. A well-known South Florida PI named Jack Harwood, hired by the family, started over, tracking down and talking to people at the motel, along Michael's route, at the dog track and clubs, and so on. And he found something. People staying in the motel in a room above Michael's, visiting from Arizona, said they heard a scuffle that night. The PI had no luck finding Michael and came to believe that he was likely dead. He said, a kid like that doesn't just disappear. He had some money and a new Grand Prix. It's worth noting that there appears to be some discrepancies in the timeline. Mr. G's, the last club James and Michael went to according to James, closed at 4 a.m. But James said Michael dropped him at his van in the church parking lot much closer to 5 a.m. Where were they in the intervening 60 minutes? Were they lingering outside the club? Did they go somewhere else that's not mentioned in the police report? Was James just way off in the time frame that he recalled? There are basically 3 theories in Michael's case. One is the usual missing persons case theory that he took off and started a new life. Michael's family says that he was happy and excited about his new life in Florida, and he didn't take anything when he left, so that seems very unlikely. The second theory is that someone with malevolent intent saw Michael waving around a wad of cash that night, and or Michael angered somebody that night, and he was waylaid and abducted in the parking lot of his hotel after being followed there. This seems a bit unlikely, too, when you consider that someone would have had to follow him from Mr. G's to James's car and then to his motel. It just seems like a bit of a stretch. The third theory, one that explains Michael and his car being missing, and him not taking any of his things or telling anyone, is that Michael and his vehicle somehow ended up in one of Florida's zillions of waterways that morning. However, it's to be noted that he disappeared in a relatively high-traffic area, at a time of day when people were starting to be out and about, and he had a very short drive along city streets. His family continued to hope that Michael was alive, perhaps with amnesia or something. They traveled to Florida a number of times to meet with authorities about the case. They continued to pay his car insurance. They submitted some of his personal items to clairvoyants in hopes that they would see something helpful. Ultimately, the family was told by both the police and clairvoyants they consulted that Michael was likely in a canal somewhere. Michael John Olson was a white male, 5 foot 8 inches tall, and weighed 165 pounds, with brown hair. Mike Morford sat down with Paige Nienabar, a childhood acquaintance of Michael Olson's, who's become an advocate for Mike, to talk about his case. That conversation is coming up after a word from our sponsors. This season on DNA ID, a couple shot at a campground, a realtor waylaid at a home showing, a bookstore owner stabbed among her volumes, a young soldier dumped in a parking lot. What do all these tragic cases have in common? They are all cold cases solved after decades of frustration and futility by forensic genealogy. I'm Jess Betancourt, and in Season 2 of DNA ID, I'll bring you 24 more fascinating cases in which the killer eluded generations of investigators until science and some crafty genealogists cracked them at long last. Listen to DNA ID on your favorite podcast platform. New episodes drop every other Monday.
Hey, Paige. Welcome to Missing Persons. I want to thank you for coming on to talk about Michael's case.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, it's a very fascinating case. You put a lot of time and research into it and effort looking into what happened to Michael. And I think the whole story, what drew you to the case, all of it is really interesting. But for listeners, can you just give us a little bit of background with you, how you knew Michael, how this case came to be in your realm?
Right. I grew up in a suburb of the Twin Cities called Edina, and the Olsons lived over on Arden Avenue. And I had just a million friends over on Arden Avenue. And Edina is upscale. There's no other way to put it. But the one thing about the Olson kids was they always worked. They always had jobs. They always stayed out of trouble. The family was, very well known. The mother worked at the local drugstore, which you'd have to be here to understand how iconic a place this was. And I had known, I'd graduated with his brother, and Mike was a year ahead of me, but I had known him through youth sports. And when I was a freshman in college, I had gone to college out in California. I'd moved out there, and this would have been his sophomore year in college. And he'd always been very, very involved with golf. That was his passion. So he had worked from like 8th grade on up at the Edina Country Club. And after his freshman year at the University of Minnesota, with the help of people at the Edina Country Club, he got a job down in Florida because he wanted to continue to grow and learn more about golf, but really the industry, the golfing business. And what better place to do that than, a country club in West Palm Beach? I was, again, out in California when all this happened. And this is back when people used to write letters to stay in touch. And I just remember coming back to the college after Christmas break and getting a letter from somebody back home, updating me with what was going on. And by the way, Mike Olson disappeared, which is, I'd hardly ever known anybody who had passed away, no less disappeared. And when I came back to the Twin Cities that summer, there was some talk about, everybody had a theory about what had happened, but it just, that was kind of it. I mean, nobody knew anything else. And, while I thought about it, it did, go to the back of my mind. And what happened in early 2020, I was working with a radio station in Tampa, and they were about to initiate a morning show feature about, true Florida crime or something like that. And one of the resources that we were using to look at these cases was something called the Charlie Project, which is the ultimate repository or archive of missing people. So in the process of doing this research, I just suddenly thought, God, I wonder if Mike Olson's in there. And sure enough, there he was. And it filled in all the context and, blew away all of the rumors and, why was he in Florida? And no, he had gone down to Florida to get a job, learned about the golfing industry. He hadn't been down there for very long. And one night went out with some coworkers, and he had just he was still living at a Howard Johnson's. He was trying to find a place to live. And his father had sent him some money. I think it was $700, and he had cashed that. And so he had that with him. And then he went out with one coworker, and then several others kind of joined and departed over the course of the evening. And they started out the evening at the Palm Beach Kennel Club, and then went to another bar at about midnight to watch the Sugar Ray Leonard prize fight. And then they wrapped up the evening at another bar. And then he dropped his coworker off at where, he had left his van over near the Palm Beach Kennel Club, and told him, I'll see you later in the morning or something like that. And this was at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. And he didn't come into work that afternoon. So I think it was that afternoon or the next morning that the people from the golf course went over to the hotel just to check on him. And the hotel manager, apparently this was a property where they had a lot of, the hotel version of Dine and Dash, where people would check in and then skip on their bill. So the manager immediately was thinking that. They let him into Mike's room, and everything was there. All of his golf clubs, everything was there, and his car was gone. So that was just really, for me, the thing that hooked me in from the very beginning was, how does a car disappear? One person, a person disappearing, that's odd enough, but how does a car disappear? And so I really started looking, more at it, and found somebody who had the police files on it. So I just kept digging in and doing research. And, one of the first things, in 2023, especially in a place like Florida, when somebody disappears, the first thing you think is water. So I had found a historical aerial photo of where the Howard Johnson's was, and then the current aerial photo of where the Howard Johnson's is. And now it's a sporting goods store. And directly behind the hotel is this kind of wedge-shaped pond. So that was the first thing that just, jumped into my mind was, he's coming back at 5 or 5:30 in the morning, and as opposed to turning right into the hotel parking lot, he takes a left. But, and I'd reached out to some diving teams in South Florida and asked them to, if they would do it, and they declined based on alligators. But also, when doing research on the South Florida Water District, those kinds of canals and ponds are cleaned, and because they get debris, tree limbs, and stuff like that, it would be really unlikely that he could be in there for that long. So I decided, I had gone out and had a happy hour with a friend from high school who had gone into law enforcement. And then I told him, I said, what if everybody in Mike's class donated $10? What if we put up a billboard? And so that one of the, and he said, that's not bad. Anything you can do to keep it out there and have people talking about it is fantastic. But he said, don't fall into the mindset that somebody is going to drive by that and suddenly have a pang of guilty conscience and decide to call. He said, maybe, what would happen if somebody would drive by and they would go, oh yeah, I remember I worked with this guy. And well, he said something really weird one time. So I looked at outdoor and billboards, and it's not, West Palm Beach just doesn't have a lot of opportunities for that. It's not a big outdoor kind of community where there's a lot of billboards around. So I then looked at, well, maybe I'll do a video on it. So I went down to West Palm Beach and created the video, and I brought everything in that I had learned, interviews with the families, the police records, an interview with the private investigator when the police finally had hit the wall. And if you look at the police record, they were very methodical about it. I mean, they did a lot of stuff that I would never have thought to do, which was call the jails. Maybe Mike's in jail. Go to the airport. Check the parking lot and stuff like that. They were very methodical about it. They didn't have a tremendous amount of information about it. They did go out and look at one body of water. They didn't identify what that was. So I took all this information and created this video and hoped that it would shake something loose. And, the one thing that I just was surprised at was the area that all of this happened in was pretty compact. For lack of a better term, Mike and his coworker were like a pinball. They were just like boom, 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 all over this kind of small square over the course of the evening. And then to get from the church, again, his coworker lived in kind of this warren of roads back behind the kennel club. I went down there with a GPS and had trouble finding the house. So, Mike with a map would have had trouble finding where this house was. That's why the coworker parked at the church. Mike dropped off the coworker, drove back to the Howard Johnsons, and disappeared in a very short distance. It wasn't that far. It was maybe a mile and a half. And he was never seen again. And that was the purpose of trying to shine a light on it and get some information out there, and maybe get the law enforcement to take another look at it. And I know that Adventures with Purpose, which is a nonprofit dive team, and they're really successful, very successful, went down there, and it was an abbreviated day. I think they have I think they call it's a 5-mile radius. And they identify every body of water within 5 miles and then look at those. And they went in and only dove a couple places because there was bad weather that day and they had obligations to go somewhere else. They pulled a couple of cars out of the water. And I think that these were insurance claim kind of cars where they drove them in and collected the insurance. But they didn't find Mike's car. They did leave with a map of other locations that they would like to look at, but so far they haven't been back.
And you mentioned they do a lot of good work, and they've had a lot of success finding remains.
Oh, absolutely.
Cars. So you brought up some really good points. You're painting a good picture for listeners of this area. You've got. It's not like he was driving all over a major city, all over different parts of it. It's a condensed area where this mystery sort of unfolded. And it's, as you mentioned, surrounded by these canals. And living in Florida here myself, I'm pretty familiar with these canals. A lot of times they're man-made. They are cleaned. They are, during the drought, like right now, the canal near our house is very low. So it does seem like it would be ultimately hard to, not impossible, but hard to have a car submerged in one of these canals and never be found. But it's definitely worth considering. But I think also has to be considered is just the fact it's a car that's gone. In addition to Mike missing is one thing, but a car, for that to be missing, it either has to be submerged on purpose, or taken to a chop shop, or buried, something like that. You can't really dispose of a car completely naturally. It's someplace.
There was an interview in the local paper up here with Mike's father, who said that in the concept of chop shops haven't really arrived yet in Edina, Minnesota. So this was a new concept for him. And he was surprised that they can take a car apart in 5 minutes. Now, I heard from his boss, there were two people. It was his coworker who palled around with him, and then his boss, Richard, from the country club, they were the ones who really lit a fire under this and contacted the police. Richard called Michael's old golf course up in the Twin Cities and asked, did he come back or anything like that? And he had in the course of that evening made a really weird reference to his coworker who he was riding around with, that he had a 1,200-mile drive ahead of him. But his boss told me in an email just the other day that there was a theory that the car had ended up on a tramp steamer and gone to the Bahamas, because that was something that happened a lot down there. And he said the port of Palm Beach was right down the road from where this all took place. The police seemed, and the PI got really tunnel vision about the community of Loxahatchee. When he took over the case, he looked at all of the people who were staying at the hotel. And there had been a report from somebody who had stayed at the hotel that they'd heard a scuffle outside and chose not to get involved. The PI had, again, he'd locked in on Loxahatchee, and at some point had sent a series of photographs to the coworker, who now works at a golf course up in New York, and asked him, do you recognize any of these people? And the coworker didn't. There seems to be, what he believed and what he also got locked in on a serial killer named Christopher Wilder, who was traveling back and forth across the country doing horrible things, and eventually got killed in a shootout by the Connecticut State Police. But he was in Florida at that time. Now, Mike was in no way, shape, or form in his MO of targets. He was going after young women, but he did get locked in on Christopher Wilder. But what everybody seems to return to is that, Mike had a significant amount of money on him. He had the equivalent of a couple $1,000 in today's money, and started the evening out at the Palm Beach Kennel Club, which, and I've now heard this from 5 or 6 different people, was they use the term seedy, with very shifty people who would hang out there. So if Mike was there and flashed a wad, well, that would get on people's radar. And then he went to a bar that was, I would go to in the daytime, let's say that. And then he went to a dance club. The only challenge I have with him being targeted is then they would have to follow him all the way back to the Hojos. And at 5:30 in the morning on Congress Avenue and Okeechobee, being followed, it would be pretty obvious because nobody else was out there. And the theory was then that they nabbed him in the car at the Hojos and took off.
Because he had a sharp-looking car, too.
Brand new.
Yeah. So there'd be value to that. If you're looking at a criminal aspect, there'd certainly be some value there for that.
I'm still trying to get to the full records, because in the police records that I got, which again were real scant, I think it was 8 or 9 pages for the entire case. They never interviewed the other guys who were out on the road with him that night. The guys who kind of popped in for a few minutes and left. These other coworkers. I'd just simply be interested to know who these guys were. And, maybe one of them went on to a life of crime, not to get, dramatic and everything. I would be interested to know simply who these guys were. The coworker, it's always the last person you see is the first person who's, at the top of the list. It just sounds like he was extremely helpful with the police, and he even went and took care of Mike's hotel bill. As one of the police people who I've talked with said that, if you spend that much time talking to the police and helping them out, and there's anything a little quirky to your story, they're going to pick up on it. And they never did. So it sounds like the coworker is free and clean on this.
Well, and it is obviously something that has to be considered. He's the last person that sees him. They're going by his account of what happened. But so the options here are Mike drops his coworker off, and then dark, tired, maybe drinking a little bit too much, makes a wrong turn, goes into the water, or he meets with foul play during a short drive. The scuffle is certainly interesting. Someone hearing something going on like that could indicate that, maybe he just had a run-in with somebody back at the hotel. And that's what's so interesting about this case is there's no solid evidence of one thing or another, but there's a couple strong possibilities, and it's such a small area we're talking about for something to happen. You're really threading the needle with the clues to what happened have to be in this very small vicinity.
Well, one of the things is, and if he chose, again, he probably had been drinking. If he chose to drive back to the Hojo's, maybe he would have taken a back road just so he wouldn't be out on a busy street with lots of law enforcement, potentially. I'm not sure whether it was because I was cheap or just lazy, but for about 3 years, I had expired tags on my car. And I became really good at driving home from the radio station and taking routes where there just wasn't going to be a lot of cops. Again, I was 25, 26. I was not the brightest 25 or 26-year-old. If Mike had left the kennel club or the church parking lot and driven across the street to try to get back to the Hojo's, it's a really confusing network of roads back there. If you look at it on the map, it's even, with the GPS, it would be difficult to get back. And on those roads, you do cross some canals. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple ponds back there too. Yeah.
So that's the thing, you have that possibility is there everywhere you turn in that area. There's canals and stuff. And I'm curious about the crime, and I didn't check this. Maybe I should have, but I don't think West Palm Beach is very seedy today. I think it's got a pretty good reputation. I don't know what it was like back then, but obviously every city is going to have its quote unquote seedy bar where nefarious stuff might happen. Do you know if the police did look at that and go in there and talk to people? And did anybody have any
one of the things that they did, because it was, again, 5:30 in the morning, there are people, there are going to be businesses that are open. They talked to a guy who delivered bakery goods to a restaurant, and this was on his route. And they tried to talk to people along the route who may have seen something. They did go and they went to the bars and they talked to people there and didn't seem to have any luck at all. It was very much by the book. I think they did a good job. We're waiting to see and get the rest of the records to see what else is in there. But I keep going back to, how does a car disappear? Mm-hmm. And I remember back when I started looking at this in 2020, there had just been a story down in Oklahoma where law enforcement had gone out to a reservoir to do a training exercise on recovering cars and found 2 cars. And they were decades apart, but they'd had high school students who had disappeared in the 60s and 70s. And there they were. So, it seems to be, it's going to be one or the other. In terms of that area of West Palm Beach, I get the impression that once you go west of the highway on Okeechobee, it started to get into, a less popular neighborhood. And again, his boss at the country club, he moved. He finally left that area because they'd had another coworker murdered in 1981. And in 1984, somebody dumped a body in the parking lot of the country club. And that was the point where he said, "No, we're gone." And he and his wife moved to Oklahoma. So I think it would be really easy. I travel a tremendous amount for work, and you can get in trouble pretty much anywhere, even the nicest places, if you do something, if you're just not using common sense.
Sure. And him being young, maybe flashing a little bit of money, somebody could have certainly seen that he got into a nice car. But then you brought up a good point. This person would have to be sort of tailing them all over the place and catch him when he's alone. The spot where he dropped off his friend to the hotel where he was supposed to wind up, how far a distance is that?
From the church to the hotel, I think it's about a mile up Congress or less. And then you take a right on Congress and a quarter of a mile and boom, you're in the hotel parking lot.
So just over this little tiny stretch is where this mystery happened, because it doesn't appear that he made it back to his hotel room.
No, he never did. Now, what's interesting is I've been trading messages with the coworker, and his story has changed a little bit. He has himself dropping Mike off at 2 a.m. Now, the police reports, when he spoke with the police, he said that Michael dropped him off at 5 or 5:30. But that's also, you're looking at 43 years. And I can't remember anything from college when 43 years ago. But his time frame has changed a little bit, but not in terms of where they visited or where they went to.
And by all accounts, and by his record, Michael wasn't involved in any shady stuff. He was a good kid. He had a job. College and all that stuff. So he seemed like he was on the up and up and wouldn't be involved with anybody.
Every single person who, when they're interviewed about this case, whether it was his employer up in Minnesota or whatever, just said, "Great kid, and knowing the family, a great family." And it's been heartbreaking for them. The parents, passed away, never finding out what had occurred. I believe that one of the siblings still has all of the interviews and all of the records from the police and from the PI. And it's really, I don't want to insert myself or intrude onto their heartbreak. So I'm trying to very deftly, see if I can get some of these records. Because again, I would be interested to know just one name that just popped up one time. Go back and take a look at that. I just finished reading this great book called Vanished in Vermilion, which was about the biggest or most iconic cold case in South Dakota history, which were two high school students who went missing in 1971. They'd driven out to the senior class kegger at a gravel pit and were never seen again. And this went on for decades and decades. And they actually identified some high school student who'd end up he'd gone on to doing some horrific stuff. And so the police finally charged him, and he was found not guilty. And this went on. And after the case, he was found not guilty. One of the people who lives out there, one of the farmers, decided to take his ATV and just retrace the route. And he stopped on a little bridge over a creek, looked over the corner of the bridge. There was the car. It had been there all along.
Wow.
They had stopped on the bridge many times to look. They'd always looked on the wrong side of the bridge, thinking that the girls had gone off leaving the party as opposed to going to the party. So, I'm hoping that we have some kind of stroke of luck like that.
Yeah. And it may take, somebody going in for, like you mentioned, maybe training of some sort, a boater, a fisherman, somebody in there for some other reason, or drought. The canals right now are low in a lot of spots, and all of a sudden things you can't see normally, you can sometimes see. So it may take something like that. Again, assuming that foul play is not an option. But, I sort of went down a rabbit hole. I know there's a conversation that there was a clue police were looking at, was this mystery college professor that Mike had mentioned. And I went down a rabbit hole trying to figure out if there was anybody by that name. Tell us a little bit about that little thing and any other rabbit holes in this case.
Well, he spoke with one of the things that was in the police report was his coworker did go and settle his hotel bill, because there had been I think an $8 differential or something. That was because the room rate had changed, but also because the day of his disappearance, he had made a 15-minute phone call to somebody he went to high school with up here in the Twin Cities. I'm trying to get in touch with Carl, the person he spoke with, to see if, there was anything that he said that may have leapt out at him. The name of the college professor came from Mike's mother. So at some point, Mike had referenced meeting a woman, and I don't have the notes directly in front of me. On the police record, it's difficult to tell whether it's a V or an R. Yeah, the parents provided a name of Mary Ann McCreevy. Now, when you look at it on the police report, it could be McCreevy because somebody wrote over the second to the last letter. McCreevy, McCreary, McCressy, and stated that they believe she was a teacher or professor at Florida Southern University. The police telephoned Florida Southern University, and they were unable to locate any record of this person. So that was a hope of a possible lead that did not materialize. So it's somebody who, again, he had apparently met while he was down there, and he'd only been down there for a couple of weeks.
And how closely did they look for this person? Did the police go looking for them, trying to figure out who this person actually was?
According to the report, all they said was that they contacted the university. I've gone and used people search kind of people search websites and stuff, and I think that I found somebody who is her, and she's on the list of people who I want to reach out to. She lives up north now, but did have a career in education.
Wow. And what was the gist of the conversation that he brought that up? Did it have anything specifically to do with the missing, his going missing? Or
No,
did they
it was
just
just
want to talk to anybody that knew him, basically?
Yeah, it was just, here's somebody else you should talk to. Because, the parents are obviously, we're losing their minds with grief, and we're just trying to give the police anything that they could jump on.
And, one thing I wanted to come back to too was the distance. He mentioned this mystery 1,200-mile ride. He didn't really go into detail. Was it 1,200 miles back to his hometown?
That's all he said was 1,200 miles, and it was never brought up again.
Okay.
And it was just a reference to the coworker. He had been really frustrated with not being able to find a place to live. But the day that he disappeared, he'd actually been at an apartment referral place and had met a woman in the parking lot and, talked with her. The coworker had been working with Michael Olson for the past 2 weeks since Olson came to Florida from Minnesota. Additional information obtained from the coworker on December 5th and December 6th was that Olson had been to a rental agency on South Dixie numerous times since he had been there, attempting to locate a place to live. He felt possibly the employees of the rental agency might have additional information. The law enforcement contacted Quality Renters and first spoke with Chris Johnson and then Alice McKinney. Both stated they thought Olson was a fine young man. He'd been in the office on Friday, the night previous to his disappearance, later in the afternoon. In joking with the employee and in general conversation, he did make a statement that if he did not find a place soon, he would head home. However, they felt and still do feel that he was kidding at that time. When he left the office, Alice McKinney put on her coat and left also. As it was her quitting time, Olson's car was parked alongside of hers. He jokingly said, "Do you want to buy my car?" And she, kidding back, said yes, for $50. And he in return replied, "How about $250 a month?" This was all in jest. Olson got in his car and left. Alice got in her car and went home. She still feels that he was kidding when he made these statements.
So just, one more thing that may not be connected to his disappearance at all, just, a part of the story.
Yeah, there had been, when the video first came out, I'd expected to get some kooks. And I only got one kook. And I looked him up. He is, in fact, a dentist, but he was presenting himself as a forensic dentist who was involved with the FBI while searching for what he was very vague. It's the biggest serial killer in U.S. history. This is going to blow the doors off. And he had found a photo of a John Doe who had washed up in San Diego Bay the following year. And he felt that this person was Mike. The photo kind of looked like Mike, but then what would have had to have occurred was that Mike would have had to vanish on his own and live under the radar and put his family through hell, which he would never have done. And that's one of the things that his father said over and over and over again was, Mike would not have walked away. He was living his dream. He was getting paid to play golf.
Yeah. That's hard, for a young person doing what you love, having a nice car, making a little bit of money. It didn't seem like there's anything to be upset about.
No. And then I had another gentleman who is, I believe, a retired investigator of some sort, and he has his own YouTube channel. And he called me up and soaked me for information and then ghosted me. And, 8-9 months later, he popped up with his own Michael Olson video. And he completely misrepresented. I mean, his investigator who he worked with, I looked her up. She works at a clothing store. But, he was talking about, in this kind of lascivious way, Michael was living a country club lifestyle. No, you idiot. He worked at a country club. If I worked at McDonald's, it doesn't mean that I'm living a McDonald's lifestyle. I mean, what a horrible thing to say. I mean, again, if this was somebody who had a history of bad behavior, I was on student council. I mean, that really, really upset me. And I feel fortunate that nobody in the family seems to have ever looked at this.
Yeah. And that's why it's, we're happy to have you on, because you knew him, you know the family, you've dealt with this, so you can give an insider's view of what really happened here and what Michael was really like.
My interactions with Mike really were from about 4th and 5th grade softball. But again, Edina it's a big, small town where everybody knows each other. I mean, there's this creek really close to where the Olsons live, and you can go swimming in the creek and canoeing and fishing in the creek. It was a great place to grow up. Mm-hmm. And I just stumbled on this thing, and I decided I'd see what I could do to maybe put another spotlight on it.
And you've done a great job. The video is fantastic. It was well presented, and it was chock full of details. Where can people watch the video if they want to check this video out? I mean, we'll link to it, but if you want to give it out on the air too.
Yeah, just go to the 1979 disappearance of Michael John Olson on YouTube, and we want to use the video that you'll see a photo of him, and that's the video that I did, and that is not a clickbait video, and was respectful to his memory and to the family. Okay.
Now you've found yourself bewildered by this case, and you're sort of doing the work on it, probably a place you never thought you would be, but here you are. Do you plan to do more with the case? Are you planning further research? Okay.
Without a doubt. I mean, since the video came out, there's been more information. Again, I had not talked to his boss, Richard Jensen, and, who emailed me from Oklahoma just the other day and just said, he thinks about this all the time. And he said that, whenever, he also did not think that the car was in the water. He said that these bodies of water were so shallow you could just walk right across them. But he did say that whenever he sees a story about a car being recovered, that's the first thing he thinks about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I wouldn't agree with walking across them, because a lot of them are, at least 3-4 feet deep, but
right, yeah.
Some of them are deep, and in Florida here we don't walk across there because there's too many alligators. But,
no.
But I get his gist of what he's saying, that we're not talking massive rivers that can sweep a car downstream, anything like that.
Again, I'm looking at the police records. I mean, they did what I think was a really good job of trying to track down people who had been staying at the hotel. There were some people who were registered under false names, and one of them, and this is for those of you who are ever considering adultery as a pastime. If you're going to use a fake name at a hotel, don't use your real driver's license or license plate. So I was able to find one of these people who'd had a room next to Michael's, and emailed him, and just, he didn't reply.
Well, and you bring up a good point, because maybe some of these people at the hotel were lying about being there or what they were there for, just not because they had anything to do with Michael's disappearance, but because they were, adultery or something else, something minor, drug dealing, something like that. And they just didn't want to get connected to Michael's case.
They looked at a lot of their James Daniels from Tennessee, and they reached out to him. And then there was a Donald Evans from Okeechobee City, but his information that he gave was wrong. So it's just, they really did what I thought was a pretty good job of trying to talk to as many people as they could there.
Wow. Well, hopefully if anybody is listening to this episode, they'll reach out to us and then we can pass their information along to you, and maybe they'll be of some use, answering questions, or you can get them in touch with the authorities. But we'll definitely link to your video. We'll link to whatever information we have as far as tip lines and stuff. So hopefully his family will get some answers and figure out what happened. And I'm going to put you on the spot as we wrap up here. What do you think happened? Do you have your own favorite theory?
I still think he went into the water. I really do.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's in all likelihood what happened. And, maybe, and I looked closely at your map, the canals there all look narrower, smaller type canals, but there was one, I'm trying to picture your map. I'm not looking at it right now, but one towards the northeast, I think. Yeah. That was a pretty big, it almost looked like a giant pond or
right.
If he got turned around, maybe he went the wrong way. It's dark. And he could have drove. And what happens if you drive off and you hit your head, you pass out and your car goes under your water, you drown. And that's, could be a possibility.
And also exiting a car when it's in the water, you have to do it really quickly or the pressure will not allow you to. I think there's certainly, something to be considered with that.
Yeah. Well, I guess time will tell. Hopefully it will tell, figure out what happened to him. But please, if you get any updates or you find any more information, let us know, because this is something we're going to be looking at. I want to thank you for coming on, Paige, and enlightening us with this case and the research and stuff that you've done so far.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on.
We'd like to tell you a little bit about our Patreon program. If you visit patreon.com/missingpodcast, you can sign up to help this podcast through ongoing monthly support. As a thank you, we'll give you an on-air shout-out, a thank you card and sticker, plus you'll get early or ad-free access to episodes of the show and any bonus content.
Your Patreon support also goes towards helping the missing, because every dollar that we earn through Patreon will be split with charlieproject.org, the wonderful website that's been sharing information about so many missing persons cases for years. We hope you'll consider supporting the show. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/missingpersonspod. We're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. And of course, you can find us and contact us through our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.